Speaking about all of that, there are definitely certain types of roles that do align for folks more with our type of an academic background compared to others. And especially with the explosion of jobs because of the pandemic and having all of these different forms of teachers, instructors. And I mean, even I've talked to plenty of professors as well, too, who said it's been a great ride. Time for my new calling. I'm like, okay, understand. We all go through those things. Are there certain positions that you can think of off the top of your head as far as for what do align well with someone with a type of an instructor, professor, or teacher type of a background?
I might take that question and turn it sideways a little bit.
Okay.
When we were doing the research for the book, what we wanted to do was visualize the alternative academic space. And rather than parsing that out by role, it made more sense for us to divide that out by career stage. My co-author, Kevin Kelly, created a lovely chart, and for those of you watching the video, I'm holding it up here on a piece of paper, and for those of you listening to the podcast on audio, come back to the show notes and Luke will have a copy of this and we'll share that with everybody. But that chart, if you imagine the vertical axis, in the middle is alternative academic, at the very top is academic, and at the bottom is non-academic altogether. So moving away from academia as you come down. And then as you move from left to right, it's career phase. So if you're preparing for your career, if you're an early career person, in the middle of your career, late career, or you're one of our legacy folks who's looking to do something different after a long while in your conversations with people. That chart ended up being a really fantastic way to think about, okay, if you want to work at a higher education institution, you're probably closer to the top of the chart, academic to alt-ac. And if you want to work outside the academy, you're probably closer to the bottom of the chart, so alt-ac to non-academic. And then when we think about our early career things, all the way up at the top, at the academic side, right? This is the traditional stuff. Graduate teaching assistant, assistant professor, associate professor, full professor. Then as we move down toward alternative academic, you get into things like adjunct teaching. Not as your primary way of earning money, but as part of a portfolio of alternative academic things. For example, even with all the speaking and consulting that I do, I still like to have my hand in a classroom teaching credit-bearing courses because it helps me to understand where today's graduate students are coming from and gives me a pipeline into connections where I hear new voices and new ideas coming in. But also things like embedded consulting, speaking, becoming an author, becoming an independent consultant, or being a unit director of a campus service unit that isn't necessarily something you've directly trained for. Colleges and universities have all kinds of service units where if you have good people skills, if you are an organized person, if you know how to keep records and data, and if you know how to think about predicting and planning, then you're in good shape. I'm actually going to slide over here and take something down off my bookshelf. This is something that I keep near to me, like I can reach this while I'm talking with folks. And it's the Project Management Institute cheat sheet study sheet for the project management process. I spent a week cramming this and a whole bunch of formulas to get my project management professional certification, and that has stood me in good stead for most of my career. Knowing how to work with stakeholders, plan things out, communicate well about the work that you do, those are all transferable skills that regardless of whether you've been a teacher, you've been an instructional designer for a long time, start looking at the various institutes and units and support areas at your institution or at institutions nearby. And then the bottom of that chart where we're talking about non-academic stuff, where you look at membership and professional associations. Do they need people who have those skills that you've got? Scholarly publishing, working with an academic press, and keeping an ear in. So at West Virginia University Press that published one of my books, Derek Krisoff is their editor, and his career started out that he was a teaching instructor. he went into scholarly publishing because it allowed him to still work with academics and be a complete book nerd. And that was one of his big passion areas. So he was able to combine those two kinds of things. So there's a lot of different ways that folks who are in teaching roles now or in other kinds of roles can focus in a little bit when you think about, well, what stage of your career are you in and where do you want to land? Do you want to land more toward the traditional academic stuff or way outside of it?
That's interesting. I'm trying to think too about from an instructional design perspective, because surprisingly, even though this is an instructional design podcast, I have talked to plenty of instructional designers who, same thing, like the professor who told me they've been doing this for 30 years. It's time to move on. And then same thing with some designers. They've done it for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And they're like, okay, what's my next thing? And it seems like all the things you said certainly do apply to that as well.
Well, and two, if we think about, do I want to do the same thing that I know how to do, or am I looking for something a little fresh, a little change, a little different? It's no shame on anybody if you get a little in a rut about the work that you do, if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. I know that if I am designing learning management system courses with faculty members for 20 years, it's going to get a little stale because they come with the same thing all the time. We don't understand how to do this, and we have to tell them about backward design, and we have to mention that we have to follow the WCAG standards and all that kind of stuff over and over and over again. So having something different or new, that can be a sideline for you, or it might turn into your primary work. So if you're looking to do the same kinds of things, look at learning and development units in industry rather than in academia. If you want to do something different, look at the learning management system companies. You've been using the LMS as an academic instructional designer for years. They have learning and development people at the LMS companies, and they want those people to tell others how to do with their products, or they want them to design new functions for the products. Every time you put in a wish list ticket for your learning management system, somebody's on the other end of that going, yeah, this is a good idea, we should explore that. And same thing like with video game industry design or publishing, like we've talked about earlier. And I want to unsay two very specific things here. Note that I do not say go knock on a library door or a museum door. You'll hear a lot of people advocating for those as alternatives. It's like, oh yeah, if you get bored with or burnt out on what you're doing, just become a librarian or go be a museum person. Let me tell you, as somebody with an information science degree, libraries and museums are specialized places where the credentials matter. If you want to go back and get a 2-year library degree and go be a librarian, awesome. But it's not. You've heard some people say, oh yeah, it's kind of a fallback position. You can go be a librarian, it's easy. No, that is a profession. So part of it is recognizing where do your skills actually fit in a way that you could slot in very easily rather than having to reprofessionalize.